Let us start with fixed income securities. The study session 15 covers the basic concepts. The first LOS is LOS 52, which is about the features of debt securities. Under this, we'll explain the purpose of bond indentures and we'll understand what are the covenants included in the indenture. Then we will look at the various features of the bond, various coupon rate, and the structure of floating rate securities. Then we'll understand the concept of accrued interest, full price or dirty price, and the clean price. We will also understand the provisions of redemption and retirement of the bonds. We'll also understand the options which are embedded in the bonds and explain their importance, as they could be beneficial to the issuer or the bondholder. And finally, we'll look at some methods which are used by the investors to finance the purchase of a security. Now let us start with bond indentures. The indenture is basically a contract which specify the rights of the bondholders and the promises made by the issuer at the time of issue of the bond. There could be two types of covenants which are associated with the bond indenture. One could be affirmative, the second could be negative. The affirmative covenants are where the borrower is expected to exhibit one kind of behavior, and in the case of negative covenants, where the borrower is prohibited from doing certain things. For example, in case of affirmative covenants, there could be restriction that the borrower will pay the interest and the principal amount on time as stipulated in the bond documents, or there could be other covenants such as he will follow certain project guidelines, etc. And in the case of negative covenants, there could be restrictions or limitations on further borrowings, or there could be restrictions on various cash flow ratios or debt ratios, that they cannot fall below a certain point. So these are the basically restrictions, positive or negative, which are put on the borrowers as per the bond documentation. Now let us look at the other features of the bond. The first one is maturity. This is the period for which the bond will remain outstanding. During this period, the bondholder is expected to get some interest payments. The bondholders may change, but at the time of interest payment, whoever is the owner should get this interest payment as long as the maturity has been not reached. This term of maturity is also used to calculate the yield offered on the bond, and within this term of maturity, the price of a bond fluctuates because the interest rate is changing in the market. Another important idea is the par value. This is also called the face value of the bond, which is mentioned on the bond, and the borrower is promising that he is going to pay this par value at the time of maturity of the bond. The third idea is coupon rate. This is basically the interest rate which is to be paid by the issuer periodically to the holders. It could be every year or semi-annual or monthly as per the agreement of the bond. It is calculated as per the percentage of par value. So when we say 6% semi-annual coupon rate, this says that the bondholder is going to get 6% of par value in a year if, say, par value is 100, then the person will get $3 in first half of the year and $3 in second half or at the end of 1 year. So one thing should be clear, that the interest which we are calculating to be repaid has to be calculated on the par value. For example, in this case, if the price of the bond is say 95 rupees or dollar, the interest should not be calculated on this 95. It should be calculated on the par value, which is 100. Although it is being traded in the market at the price of 95, but for interest calculations we are going to use only face value or the par value. The structure of these coupon rates can be different. Let us look at various types of coupon rate structures. First is zero coupon bond. This is simplest of all the bonds, in which the coupon rate is 0, no coupon is paid. So there is the current value or price of the bond, which is the price, and the par value, which is to be repaid in the end. So there are only two values here. There are no interest payments in zero coupon bonds. But in this case, we cannot say that no interest is being paid, as we know that there is a difference between the price and par value. For example, if the bond is being traded at $90 today and it is going to be matured in 1 year and the par value is say $100, we can clearly see that person is going to earn $10 of interest on this bond, but it will not be paid as coupon rate. So we can say the interest is realized at the end of maturity, which is basically the difference between the par value and the issue value, or at the price at which the borrower has bought the bond. If the borrower is the first borrower, then it will be an issue value. If the borrower has issued the bond and it is being traded in the secondary market and investors are purchasing from there, then it would be current value. The second kind of structure is step-up notes. The step-up indicates that a coupon rate is going to increase over time. For example, there could be a bond of $100 par value. Time to maturity could be say 3 years, and the coupon rate will be different for all 3 years. It will be increasing. Say for first year it could be 5%, second year it could be 6%, and third year it could be 7%. So this is step-up notes. As the bond reaches close to the time to maturity, the interest rate increases, which is to be paid periodically. Third type is deferred coupon bonds. These are the bonds in which coupon interest is issued but not immediately, after a deferment of a certain period. For example, there could be a bond of $100 present value, par value. There could be maturity, which is say 5 years. Coupon rate could be 6%, but it is deferred by 2 years. So in this case, for first 2 years, the investor is not going to earn any coupon on the bond. Only from third year, the investor is going to receive the coupon rate. So these bonds are called deferred coupon bonds. The fourth type is floating rate securities. On these securities, the coupon rate is not fixed. It is not fixed. We tie this up to a reference rate. For example, it could be LIBOR, which is London Interbank Offer Rate. and it could be some plus minus some margin. So as the interest rate in the market is changing, the coupon rate is also changing according to that. So there could be reference rate and a quoted margin. For example, we can write LIBOR plus 3%. This is the case of floating rate security, which is also called a floater. There is an agreement between the borrower and the investor that the coupon rate will be resetted after a certain period. For example, every month the coupon rate is going to be different based on the LIBOR, and there will be certain quoted margin. It could be plus or it could be even minus. And a certain variant of floating rate security is inverse floater, in which the coupon rate moves in opposite direction from the interest rate, from the reference rate. For example, if the coupon rate is say 12% minus LIBOR. So in this case, coupon rate is going to move in opposite direction than LIBOR. Suppose earlier in the first say month, the LIBOR was 6%. So the coupon rate was 6%. If in the second month LIBOR moves to 8%, your coupon rate is going to be 12 minus 8, which is 4%. Similarly, if in the next month LIBOR moves to say 3%, the coupon rate is going to be 12 minus 3, which is 9%. So if the LIBOR goes up, the coupon rate comes down. If the LIBOR comes down, the coupon rate goes up. So this is the case of inverse floater, since the coupon rate is moving in opposite direction from the change in the reference rate. Now let us take a few examples. So this is asking the coupon rate structure. So let us look at the first case. Here the coupon rate is defined as 20% minus 1.5 times 3-year treasury rate. So this is our reference rate. And this negative sign signifies that our coupon rate is going in opposite direction than our treasury rate, which is the reference rate in this case. That signifies that it is a case of inverse floater. Since the coupon rate is not fixed, it is based on a reference rate, it is floater, and because the sign is negative, which shows it is an inverse floater. Let us look at the second case where the coupon rate is 1 month LIBOR, which is our reference rate, plus 50 basis point, which is 0.5%. So this is the case of floater or floating rate security. Now let us look at the third case where the coupon structure is given as for year 1 to 3 it is 5%, for year 4 to 7 it is 5.5%, for year 7 to 10 it is 6%. We can clearly see that there are steps and the coupon rate is rising step by step. For first 3 years it is 5%, next 3 years it is 5.5%, and it is rising. So this is the case of step up notes. Now let us move to the next concept, which is accrued interest. This concept will help us to understand the concept of clean price and dirty price. The idea of accrued interest comes into the picture when we are talking about a bond which is being traded in secondary market, which means there could be a company which is borrowing from the market, from investors. It has issued certain bonds, and now these bonds are being traded among the investors in some exchange, which is a secondary market. Now let us look at the definition. The accrued interest is the interest that the new owner or the buyer of the bond owes to the seller, and it happens since the trading of the bond is happening between coupon dates. For example, if Mr. A is the owner of the bond and he is receiving interest payments or coupon payments annually, so he is entitled to receive interest on 31st December, but he sold the bond to Mr. B on 1st of July. And after 6 months itself, the person sold the bond to somebody else. Now in this case, Mr. A was holding the bond for first 6 months, but Mr. B is going to receive the coupon in the end of this year 2012. On 31st December 2012, Mr. B is going to receive the whole coupon for the whole year, because of which the new owner, which is Mr. B, owes the 6-month accrued interest to old owner or the seller, Mr. A. So that is the difference which has to be paid by the new owner to the old owner. So this amount which will create a difference between the clean price and full or dirty price. So if we are not considering accrued interest, simply the price of the bond, that will be the clean price. And if we consider the impact of accrued interest and if we add that in clean price, we will get full or dirty price. So actually, in order to buy the bond from Mr. A, Mr. B has to pay clean price plus accrued interest, which is full price or dirty price. Because of the effect of accrued interest and the complex calculations associated with it, we use the word dirty here. And the term full price explains it. Now let us move to the next idea, which is about redemption and retirement of the bonds. So bond can be redeemed before it attains its maturity, or it could be retired. As you already know, there could be two cases, one where the issuer has opted for bullet maturity, as we have seen the case of zero coupon bond, where the principal is going to be paid in the end, or the amortization where principal is being paid periodically along with the interest. Now when we talk about the redemption of the bond before its maturity, there could be call provisions or refunding provisions in the bond which are mentioned in the bond documentation. When the issuer has a right to buy back the bond, and return the funds to the investor before maturity. We call it a call option. The issuer has the right to call the bond or to buy back the bond and return the funds to the investor. As we see, this call option has a lot of value for the issuer since it provides flexibility to the issuer, but it is a negative case for the investor. So that is why the callable bonds are cheaper than the other bonds to the investors, since that option price is adjusted. Similarly, there could be refunding option. Refunding means if the issuer gets funding from some other source which is cheaper than the current bonds, then he can call these bonds back, return their funds through issuing other bonds or other mechanism of funding, which is known as refunding provision. So in the bond itself, there could be a condition. For example, that bond is non-callable, so it cannot be called before maturity. So investors are protected against this call prior to maturity. And if it is a non-refundable bond, then the bond can be called, but not for the reason of refunding. There could be any other reason. It can be called for any reason apart from refunding. For example, if the borrower has got access to a large one-time cash flow from selling of certain asset or exceptional sales, etc., that cash could be used to call these bonds and retire some of these bonds. But these bonds cannot be recalled for getting a cheaper funding from some other source, because these bonds are non-refundable. There is a minor difference between non-callable and non-refundable bonds. As we understand, the non-refundable bonds are also non-callable if the reason is any other reason apart from refunding. So there is only slight difference between the non-callable bond and non-refundable bond. The non-refundable bonds are callable if they are being called for any other reason apart from refunding. But for refunding, even they are non-callable. Now let us move to the next topic, which is embedded options. As we have seen, there could be a call option embedded in the bond. Similarly, there could be some other options which are there in the bond document. They are embedded inside the bond. For example, as we have already seen, the right to call the issue and pay back the money to the investors. This could be one option which is embedded in the bond. So this is the option which is granted to the issuer and not to the investor or bondholder. The another embedded option could be right of the underlying borrowers in a pool of loans to repay principal above a scheduled principal payment. For example, if in our bond document there is a amortization schedule according to which the borrower is expected to pay certain part of the principal along with the interest. Okay, so this is according to the schedule. If the borrower is paying principal more than this scheduled part, then this right has to be mentioned in the bond document. So this option is also embedded and it is granted to the issuer. As we know, in the case of home loans, generally the borrower has right to prepay, where he is paying principal above the scheduled payment. Similarly, there is accelerated sinking fund provision. In this as well, a large amount of principal, part of the principal is being paid along with the interest itself, so that that debt is expired sooner than the schedule. Fourth option is on a floater. As we know, in the case of floating securities, coupon rate is not fixed, it is flexible and tied to a reference rate. So every month or every year, based on the period mentioned in the bond, the interest rate which is received by the investor is changing. But there could be a constraint, a cap, that interest cannot be greater than some percentage, say 6%. So if there is a 6% cap on the bond and it is a floating rate security, we know that coupon rate will vary, it is flexible along with the reference rate, but to the maximum limit of 6%. It cannot move beyond 6%. So that means 6% is the cap on the floater. So if there is a cap on the floater, it is in the interest of issuer. Issuer is the one who is going to pay this interest. So this option is granted to the issuer. Let us look at the other side where the option is embedded in the bond and it is beneficial to the bondholder. It could be conversion privilege. For example, we have convertible securities, which can be converted into shares after a certain duration. That privilege is given, that option is given to the bondholder. If they do not want to convert, they are allowed to do so. So that is the option with the bondholders. Similar to the concept of call, there is opposite concept of put, where the bondholders have this option. As and when they want, they can return the bond to the issuer and get the value of the bond from them. So this is the right to put or right to sell the bond to the issuer. So this option is with the bondholder. And finally, we have the case of floating rate security, which we have seen just now, the cap on a floater, which was the case where it was in the interest of issuer, and floor on a floater is in the interest of the bondholder. Floor is the minimum interest rate, minimum coupon rate. For example, it is say 5%. As we know, the coupon rate is flexible in floating rate securities, so it cannot fall below 5%. It cannot be less than 5%. So every month or every period, the investor is going to get at least 5% coupon rate. So this is in the interest of investor or bondholder. This is called floor. This is the minimum coupon rate. Now let us move to the next slide. So we need to understand these embedded options inside bond. To understand the value of the bond clearly, to value a fixed income security with embedded option, we need to model these factors which can affect these embedded options. Since we have to value the fixed income security, along with the price, we need to look at the embedded option as well to find the true value of the security. So while we are modeling the factors, we need to look at whether an embedded options will be exercised over the life of security, and if it is exercised, under what circumstances it will be exercised. So on the basis of that, we need to model the value of the option. So if the option is granted to the issuer, we need to understand the behavior of the issuer, in what cases the issuer can exercise this option, and if it is given to the borrower, we need to look at the behavior of borrower and analyze the cases in which the borrowers are more likely to exercise this option. Based on this analysis, we will be able to find out what is the value of embedded option, and we can adjust the value of the bond according to this value. But as we know, there is no one fixed model to find out the value of this option. There are multiple models. For example, Black-Scholes model or binomial model. There are multiple models available. Find out the value of these embedded options. So because of them, the investor is exposed to modeling risk, where he or she may not be able to find the true value of that option and hence the true value of the bond. So they might be at a disadvantage. Now let us move to the next slide. So these are the two ways in which the institutional investors borrow to purchase these bonds. One could be margin buying, in which the funds are being borrowed from the broker and the bank is making the payment to the broker. Broker is charging for call money rate, which is the short-term interest rate for the fund which he has given, plus a service charge from the investor. So he is basically providing fund to the investor based on the interest, which are short-term money market rates and service charges. An investor is using these funds to generate returns on them. There could be another way, which is repurchase agreement, As the name itself suggests, it is the agreement between buyer and seller that after a certain period, the buyer will sell that bond back to the seller. Or in other words, the seller makes a commitment that it will buy it back from the buyer at a specific date, at a specific price in the future. That price determines the interest rate involved. Now that brings us to the end of the first reading.